You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Hello again, everyone. This is Doug Thorpe, and you're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Today, we are going to lean into the world of executive presence. You know, what does it mean? How do you get there? Where do you even start? And my guest is a fellow coach, coaching professional with some global reach and experience. Her name is Inga Hebdon. Inga, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Doug. It's absolutely fantastic being here with you.
As you might have already picked up, folks, a little bit of an accent. Inga, tell us about your background and your journeys across this globe.
Yeah, I think now I feel obliged to say something about the accent first, because it's a nice mix, and depending on what people think. It's a mix of me being German. So my heritage is German. I actually was born and raised in West Berlin. The war was still there. And that's kind of where one of the accent is coming from. But then I moved later in life, in my professional life, I moved to the UK, to London, England. And I stayed there much longer than I actually wanted. So the plan was 2 years, and I ended up staying for 15. One of the reasons is my husband, but I also thoroughly enjoyed it. And now I'm here in the US, kind of the last 2.5 years in the US, which is kind of where the mix of the accent is coming from. People still picked up quite quickly, and it's always a great talking point. So yeah.
For sure. Well, that's great. Well, so you are an executive coach with an ICF PCC credential,
That's
I think.
correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Top of the stack there. So congratulations on that achievement.
Thank you.
And tell us a little bit about your coaching practice and how did you decide to sort of zero in on this magic of executive presence?
That's a good question. I think to a certain extent, I always had a knack for coaching, or at least for supporting and serving others. So hindsight is a nice thing, right? I kind of look back at my career as well as my personal life. People would have always approached me and say, listen, can I get your opinion? Or I would just pick up on things and ask, what's happening? How are you? Anything I can help with. So that's kind of a red thread throughout my entire life. But then, having been in the corporate world for about 20 years, I also worked with a lot of people who would have struggled with really presenting themselves in a way that it conveys a certain message. And what's the right word? I think I was at the right place at the right time. I was actually working in KPMG, also in the professional services world, right, where I would support teams on strategic sales initiatives. In particular, individuals who might not know much about the magic of sales. And so it was my role to really guide them, advise them, but also coach them through different types of client interactions. And through that, I also discovered different forms of communicating, different forms of people's ability to really command a room, to draw in the attention, for people to create a space where they are actually comfortable with silence. They're comfortable with the world of the unknown. And I started to be really fascinated by it in terms of what do they do differently? How do they, why do they come across differently? And why do they feel more comfortable than others? What's the underlying challenges, questions, and emotions, and all of that. So I thought that's really interesting. So I started to dig deeper into that. So my role from being a strategic advisor on sales opportunities also morphed into a kind of like a confidant, really, with some individuals, where they said, oh, I haven't really done this. And if people are pitching for multi-million-dollar deals, the pressure is on for themselves, but also the pressure is on when they're dealing with their own performance and how they stack up in the team.
Yeah.
And all those things need to be managed. So the more I allowed myself to be that confidant, the more I was able to actually support them from a completely different perspective. And that, I think, ignited my flame when it comes to the coaching journey, so that I went back to school and got a formal education on polishing my coaching skills in order to really, how do I create a better environment for people, and so that I can help them even more in whatever they want to succeed in.
Well, it is an interesting journey, and you tell a story here not uncommon for a lot of coaches who have come up through the corporate ranks or various other walks of life. And for many of us, we had that same similar experience. We realized there's a certain something about, well, whatever it is we're doing, whether it's intentional or not, and that is that people tended to sort of exude a trust in us to be that confidant, to be that person. And
yeah,
I know that's how the door opened for me, because after leaving my corporate day job, I went into consulting, and as those projects unfolded, I found myself sitting across the table from a client who it was obvious was having some sort of struggle. And you just offer an ear and they'll say, shut the door. Yeah, I want to talk. And because you're an outside party, there's a kind of a disconnect there that is comfortable, and being able to, be that ear and that voice. And then as you said, you sort of beef that up with some formal training and development on your own to really hone those skills, where it's not just being another kind of a consultant, but actually helping steer and discover the best possibility for the client. And one of the big areas that leaders in business struggle with is that idea of executive presence. So when we were in the green room prepping for the call here, you talked about some of the actual different layers or different elements of what make up the whole aura of executive presence. I mean, popularly, we think about that person, man or female, male or female, walks in the room and just everybody stops talking. It's like, okay, the boss is here, let's get serious. But and that is popularly considered gravitas, some sort of, aura like that. But there's a whole lot more to effective executive presence. So share with us your ideas on the couple of different dimensions.
Yeah, happy to. And what you described, I think, is a common misconception. I even heard somebody saying, well, I always thought you either have it or you don't. And I'm thinking, not that simple. It can actually be learned. Yes, some people may have certain talents, and it makes them easier. It makes it easier for certain people to build upon it. But nonetheless, executive presence is something which can truly be learned. And to answer your question, right, those building blocks, one of them is gravitas. Lots of things fall under gravitas, but I think for a strong executive presence. So for that ability to really command the room, to exude confidence and authenticity, the things under there are the effectiveness under stress. So having a really good amount of self-awareness on how do I, as an executive or any leader, show up under different circumstances, in particular when the pressure is high, when there's a stressful situation. Do I still show up, and am I still at my best or not? So it takes a certain amount of self-awareness in order to look at it from an outside perspective and then adjust accordingly, and making sure that, okay, even if life is falling apart, I'm still there to create an environment where my staff feels psychologically safe, so that they can share, that they are independent, so that I, as a leader, don't have to watch over them all the time, that I actually can delegate and let go of the control. So it takes a certain amount of self-awareness and confidence in your own abilities, as well as in that in others, in order to facilitate that kind of environment. And that pretty much falls under the umbrella of gravitas. So the self-awareness, a level of confidence in your own abilities, but also the ability to communicate that confidence into others, whilst at the same time staying true to yourself. So some people are more introverted versus extroverted. It doesn't mean it all needs to be the same. It's the same layer. It's really tailored. So that self-awareness, the ability to influence, to communicate, is all in there. And a very tiny fraction is the actual appearance. So, am I able to dress according to the audience? Or do I always underdress or overdress? Because usually that has a knock-on effect, right? So if you overdress and you walk into a room, you probably feel slightly uncomfortable, but you think, oh, well, better overdress than underdress. So if you flip it and you're underdressed, it can have a knock-on effect on your confidence.
Right.
And as soon as that confidence is kind of not 100%, you might not come across as that confident leader or that person you want to come across at and convey.
Right.
And so those are the nuances.
I think the whole confidence element is a big factor that I often run into, and what is incredibly closely related to that, as people tend to get moved up on the corporate ladder, there's this inevitable entry of the imposter syndrome idea that you get in the role, you're sitting there and you start looking around and your mind starts playing games with you. And all of a sudden, for whatever reason, you start getting these signals that I'm not worthy, I'm not enough. I'm afraid people are going to find out I have so many shortcomings for the success in this job. And it just gets to be this downward spiral. And I'll give you a real quick example. I've told this story before. I had an executive client a number of years ago who, on his career journey, was tapped to be the heir apparent as a department head in a good-sized national bank. And the senior exec that was in that seat was slated to retire like 2 years out. I mean, it was a very kind of long fuse succession plan, but nonetheless, the organization made the moves to set all this up. So the outgoing guy was still going to have charge, but my client was going to be the understudy, so to speak, and they literally moved them in the offices next door to each other. They worked for almost 2 years together. And as my client explained to me, over time, it got to where all the decisions of the department came to him first. and he would make the decision and then get the elder in the other room just to be informed and bless or discuss what was going on. And pretty soon there was fundamentally no need for the senior guy to be there. My person had totally absorbed the duties and was doing great with it. Department was growing, numbers were producing, yada, yada. Well, the day finally came for the elder to retire and literally pack up his boxes and vacate the corner office. My client moved in, and I had a call scheduled with him the day after the effective date of all this. And he was in a panic when we got on the phone. He was having his own little pity party meltdown thing. And I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "I can't believe it, but now that I'm in this seat, I just feel so inadequate, so inferior." And I said, we had built a pretty blunt rapport, and I said, "You got to be kidding me! You've been doing this for 2 years. Why now? Why?" He said, "I don't know. I'm surprised too, but it's different now that I've got the title, now that it is all officially on me."
Yeah.
The other guy was
all of a
always
sudden
a
he has
little
to
bit of a
deliver.
second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I get it. And that's the case. And, like you said it, right? We make up so many stories in our head. I mean, who said that? Somebody recently in my network said that the person we talk most to is ourselves. As and the kind of conversations we have with ourselves are usually not very kind.
Sometimes not. That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And the thing though is I find people who are aware of that kind of conversation in their head, right? The self-awareness or raising that type of awareness is kind of the first step in order to do something about it. You can actually also control that conversation, and going down that downward spiral of, almost tearing yourself apart when it comes to the self-doubt. Yes, there's a lot of pressure right now. Oh my God, I'm having the title like you described with your client. I'm sitting in the corner office. Before that, it was all unofficial. Now it's the official things. People are relying on me. So it's an entire conversation, right, that a person is having with themselves, and it's not a very pleasant conversation.
Yeah, right.
And if there's nobody there to interject and say, "Stop for a minute, let's reflect on what are the facts," right? Basically put a stop to that really negative self-talk.
Yeah. I had another client in a similar discussion, and we had been talking about all this and the nature of the self-talk. And finally she said, "Oh my God," she said, "this is just," she said, "they do it in movies and cartoons. You got the little white angel and the black angel on your shoulder, and they're having the debate and they're driving you nuts with the argument they're having, but it's all going on simultaneously in your head."
Yeah.
And she took her finger and she did kind of one of these thumping motions. And she said, "I'm getting rid of the dark angel." She said, that's the issue. I just got to thump him off. Every time he starts talking, I just need to shut him up and ignore him, and I'll be okay.
Nice.
And that became her visual. And as our coaching progressed and she would be describing situational challenges she was faced with, she said, "It's corny, but I actually do. I thump myself on the shoulder where I can hear it and feel it. And as a reminder that I'm getting rid of that dark angel." And she said, "It's weird how it has created for me just such a better headspace for going into my situations." And she said, "Here of late, I've been invited to go to the CEO's office to have some meetings." And she said, "I've got to thump them every time, but when I do, I'm fine. And the meetings go well. And, my advice is taken, and, I'm getting listened to." And she said, "It's great. Everything's great now." So,
yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. I had a partner. I mean, that's a long time ago. I was at KPMG, really kind of working with the teams on on a presentation. So it was really prepping the different individuals for a big sales presentation in front of a potential client. And we were having a conversation about kind of like a walkthrough. And everybody in the room was really lively. They're very charming individuals. They had great stories to tell. But the minute you would have asked them to present their little piece of content, they were so boring, to be quite frank, because there was that image in everybody's heads, like, well, we're partners at this company. We need to come across a certain way. With that, we cannot joke. We can't show our authentic selves, and we need to be relatively monotonous in our presentation. So it was all those little things, which then accumulated to an absolutely boring and dreadful presentation.
Yeah.
And it was also on me to feed that back, to give that information back. What I then found interesting is that one of those individuals came up with a visual. It's like, oh, that's so interesting. Because I think about it as a dial, as a, the old time radios where we really actually had a button which we can kind of turn one way or another. And he started to visualize that in terms of not just the volume, but also the melody of his speech to make it a little bit more engaging. And as soon as he started to play with that in his mind, in terms of, oh, I'm turning it up now, I'm turning it down a little bit, we started to have a conversation about, okay, just turn it up 1 or 2 points on a scale of 1 to 10. And it became a completely different conversation. So I really love those visuals. And it does have an impact on, at the end of the day, the executive presence, because it is so much more engaging, and people believe what they see, and they have the ability to emotionally connect to that individual as well.
Yeah. So Inga, when a client comes to you and says they would like some help with their executive presence, where do you typically start?
I would like to know what it is they really want. So the underlining reason for coming to me. So again, everybody has a different type of definition what executive presence is, and everybody has different challenges or different thoughts on executive presence. So it's really having a conversation of, well, what's the client's understanding and what do they want to be different? So it's really a gaining an understanding of where's the client right now versus to where they want to be, because that then really gives us the ability to map out the building blocks, so to speak, or the gaps, and create a good plan. So it is really about gaining an understanding of, okay, so tell me a little bit more about you. What is it that you think you're not having? What is it you maybe struggle with? How do you show up in various scenarios, and what's the difference, and what's the reason for that difference, right? So it's really getting into that kind of conversation to then figure out, okay, so what is executive presence for you? What would you like to achieve? Why is executive presence the vehicle? What is it the vehicle for? That's the kind of conversation.
Yeah, and I think it's also really tricky when someone does say that's an area they would like to work on, because frequently there's a jump to point to an example. Maybe it's the CEO of the company or some other executive they know about, and they kind of immediately say, I want to be like that or like them. And I always caution clients when they come with that sort of statement that, you're never going to be exactly like them. You need to bring your own authentic self to that picture. And maybe the picture of what that person does is admirable and a good high standard that is worthy of striving to achieve, but to couch it in terms of I want to be just like them, I think that's a false hope and probably a misguided objective at some level. What I always do when clients start that way, I say, well, let's break it down. What are the elements that you observe when this other person shows up? And how would you rate yourself on each of those different elements, standing alone, standing apart from who that other person really is?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I like the approach because obviously it also gives them a chance to come from it from a very neutral perspective, right? Because they're rather describing somebody else and what they're observing, and rather than saying, well, I don't have X, Y, Z. So it's also giving them a chance to save face for a little bit, so to speak, before, which is all part of building the trust and the rapport in the coaching relationship, because nothing works without that.
Yeah. Well, and, classic examples that do come up, there are those that show up in leadership roles that do have a great command of the room. They do have a great presence. And sometimes those individuals, even comparing them, some are more stoic, more reserved than others. Some are a little more outgoing, gregarious, classic introvert, extrovert kind of paradigm. But again, it's for all of those reasons that I encourage my clients to try to pick their unique self that, needs to be the one showing up. And can somebody show up a little stronger, a little more confident, a little bolder? Yeah, maybe those are, the right goals to strive to achieve. But to just simply say, I want to be exactly like that guy over there, that's
no, and even if they manage to do that for a time, I mean, the amount of energy that costs, that's depleting. That's and people will figure it out at some point. They will see it.
That's right.
It's sometimes we can't just put the finger on it. We can't describe it what it is, but we've all been in a situation where we're just like, there's something going on. I don't know what it is, but I just don't trust that person, right? I trust him as far as I can throw him, basically. And that's all we can come up with as an explanation. So people are aware, they figure it out.
Well, and, in leadership circles and leadership studies, there's always a talk about physical attributes contributing. And sadly, there's no denying there's some of that going on, that some people are blessed with either a height or look that just fits. It just works, and I, in my early banking days, the chairman of our bank was a gentleman that was 6'7" tall, and he commanded most every room he walked in, it's like
just by the sheer height. Yeah, I get that.
And what was funny, our bank was a large regional, and in our evolution as an organization, inevitably we were bought by one of the New York banks. And the chairman of the New York bank that bought us showed up for the on-site, the big day of the announcement and all the fanfare. Well, he was 6'8", so he's the first bank leader that any of us had ever experienced. It was actually taller than our guy, so they're standing up there at the podium. And there was even a little bit of a moment that our chairman it was noticeable that he felt small for the first time probably ever. It was kind of it was just a fleeting moment of an impression, but nonetheless, it was very true and very real. Just that when they tried to stand next to each other and look eye to eye, there was this little bit of
Yeah,
an
absolutely.
offset.
And particularly if you're not used to it, and then all of a sudden you're thrown into it, and it's like, ooh, and now I got to swim.
Yeah.
I don't want to drown. I swim, and it takes a lot of effort. It's kind of like calm at the surface and paddling under the surface like a duck. So I can understand. I can understand that. And you even picked up on it, right? That there was that moment, and that's with so many others when they're just trying to be somebody else. And I've had this conversation with introverts in particular, right? Because the world is almost run by extroverts. It's the wrong word of phrasing, but extroverts are kind of the majority of the people, and introverts are kind of in the minority. And then for some reason, lots of introverts always feel like in order to be successful, they need to be more extroverted. And to a certain extent, there's a certain pressure and expectation on that. But if, as an introvert, you take it too far, again, it's not authentic because people will pick up on it. It's not because they're operating out of their, I wouldn't say comfort zone, but they're operating in a way that it's not true to them. We all have our abilities, right? Where we can dial up and can dial down depending on the environment. We're a little bit more lively, outgoing, or a little bit more quiet. So wherever you are on the scale of introvert versus extroverts, of course you have the flexibility, right? And that's where the art form is. Recognizing I have that flexibility. I recognize my environment I am in. It's called for, a little bit more to what I would usually do. If I'm presenting in front of a client, I dial it up a little bit more rather than, being in a deep and thoughtful conversation where I'm trying to find a solution to a serious issue, or where I actually have a one-on-one conversation with somebody who has performance issues. Different energies or a different type of energy is required. So of course we all have the ability to dial it up and down. But the art is really recognizing when, as well as staying true to yourself, so that people feel that, yeah, that's authentic. I believe what the person is saying because it's conveyed in every single thing, from the words, the body language, and called cheesy, the aura, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, Inga, this has been great. Thank you for sitting in. Tell people the best way to get a hold of you if they're interested in knowing more about your work.
Yeah. So I am on LinkedIn. So just Google or on LinkedIn, Inga Hebdon. But I'm also on Instagram. That's probably two very easy ways to get in touch with me and to figure out a little bit more about myself. But I also have a website called medeaintl.com, which is named after a figure of the Greek mythology. I don't know if you know the story of Medea, but she's just a brief excursion. Medea is a enchantress who helped her husband steal the golden fleece, which was kind of a symbol of kingmanship and success. So she pretty much operated in the background and really supported him in order to be that successful person. Ignore the gruesome ending of the story because it has a really gruesome ending.
Yeah.
That's not right. What I have in common with her, but what I certainly have in common is that I take great pleasure of supporting others in their success and serve other people in their ambitions. So I operate in that background, which is why I chose the name of Medea is my company name.
I like that. A great story. So thank you. Well, folks, as always, we're going to have those links and there's a setup for that in our show notes. So if you do want to reach out to Inga, let her know and click on any of those links. And this is a place in the show I like to remind everybody that if you've been listening on your favorite streaming service, it's time to hop over to YouTube and channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Take a look at the video version of this show that we've got over there, and there will be some clips and shorts coming out in parallel with the release. So I look forward to getting your feedback and input there. For now, we're going to sign off, say goodbye, go out there and make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.